Hello, and welcome to this introduction to the library and information literacy. Today, we'll be talking about some tips and tricks that you need to know to get the highest score possible on the data narrative portion of your master's defense. During this webinar, I'll touch briefly on what sort of resources are available at the Relay Library, and then we'll walk through how to develop your research question, how to engage with academic literature in your data narrative, and how to most effectively find research and resources to support your rationale. And we'll touch a little bit on how to evaluate the sources that you find for reliability, and then how to cite them properly. First, let me give you a brief overview of the Relay Library. While most campuses have small physical collections, the vast majority of our resources are digital. We have over 100,000 ebooks, and we have hundreds of thousands of journal articles. In addition to the more standard library fare, we've got a lot of other useful resources. We have a subscription to Education Week, so you can stay up to date on what's going on in the education world. We have Canopy for films and documentaries, and the Curriculum Resource Center for maps, timelines, and other curricular resources. We also have Kids InfoBits, which is a database with information for elementary school students. You can find even more resources in our highlighted resources page, which you can access through the Lib 101 guide or on Canvas. You can access all of these resources by going to relay.edu/library, or you can click on the library resources link in a course in Canvas, or you can use one of the many search boxes that you'll find in most of our LibGuides or Canvas courses. So that's sort of an overview of the library and how to access it. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about information literacy, or how you find, use, and evaluate information. So this skill is super important for you as a teacher so that you can critically evaluate the information that will improve your teaching. It's also important for your students, particularly in this era of social media, fake news. It's important to know how we as teachers can help them find information that's relevant and trustworthy. I could talk about information literacy all day, but of course today we're here mostly to focus on information literacy in the context of the data narrative portion of your master's defense. So as you can see on this slide, the first step in information literacy is identifying your options, or figuring out what kind of information you need and where to find it. So this year you're being asked to investigate one research question. So if you haven't figured out your research question yet, there's a few things that you can look at to help narrow down your question. Maybe there's something in particular that stands out about your data, or maybe you find yourself discussing certain groups of students with your team at school. You can look at any special programs or instructional strategies that are being implemented at your school. Most importantly, when you're thinking about your research question, you do want to make sure that it's something that you're genuinely interested in. There's nothing worse than having to spend loads of time and effort researching a topic that you find boring or confusing. These are all great places to start, and if you're still having trouble, or if you have a topic in mind but you're having trouble framing it into a researchable question, feel free to reach out to the library for help. Once you have your question, to get a passing score on these sections of the rubric, you need to give a compelling rationale and then examine your data to answer the question. Here, I give you an example of a research question and rationale for selection. Feel free to pause the video here to read through this example. Now, this example is pretty solid, and it would receive a proficient on these sections of the rubric. In order to turn this example into exemplary, however, the student would have had to authentically position their analysis within the formal academic literature addressing a similar question, as seen in the outline sections of the rubric on this slide. So, what does that mean? As librarians, we like to talk about scholarship as a conversation. By this, I mean that academic scholarship is an ongoing discourse within a community of scholars, researchers, and professionals. And with every new study or research publication, this conversation produces new insights and discoveries over time, as all of these authors with competing perspectives and interpretations present new ideas and respond to existing ones. So when you, as the rubric says, authentically position your response within the formal academic literature on a subject, you're participating in that conversation. You're listening to what other people have said in the subject before, and then you add in your own voice. In the example before, by using phrases like, "I've heard that," without providing any sources to back their statements up, the student didn't show evidence that they were listening and responding to the larger conversation. They just gave their own findings without any context. In this excerpt, you see an example of a different graduate student who examined a similar research question to the sample before. This example, however, positions the response within the formal academic literature. Take a moment to pause and read through this example. Note how the teacher uses outside sources to talk about how their research fits in with the wider conversation. So in this example, they position what they've noticed at their own school within the larger academic conversation. Specifically, they're worried that their class was reproducing some of the concerning data trends that they read about in the academic literature. As a brief side note, while in this webinar we're primarily focusing on the research question and analysis section of the data narrative, I also want to point out the next steps section of the data narrative. Coming up, we'll be talking about how to find academic literature, which is something that will also help you to determine your next steps. So, what does all of this mean for your data narrative? Well, first, as shown in the rubric, you're looking for academic literature. This means that you're going to be looking more for scholarly or possibly practitioner sources, but you should generally avoid popular sources. Resources like Learning for Justice or blogs like Cult of Pedagogy might be extremely helpful when looking for lesson plans and teaching tips, but that's not quite what we're going for here. As you read, you also want to skim for relevance. You can look at the book introduction or the article abstract and conclusion. These can give you good clues about what type of source it is, whether it's a scholarly source or not, and whether it's a research study for scholars, whether it's a news article for a popular audience, that sort of thing. It'll also tell you whether the source is relevant, which can help to save you a lot of time. And then finally, for your data narrative, sources in the library are more likely to be scholarly and peer-reviewed, which means that they are more reliable. Google, or even Google Scholar, can be a great place to find things like educational reports or statistics, but you'll also want to be much more careful in evaluating these sources to make sure that they're accurate and reliable. Okay, so we know that we're looking for primarily scholarly sources. We know we can find them in the Relay library or on Google if need be, and we know that we can skim them to see whether or not they're scholarly and whether they're relevant. And I'll go into even more detail about that in just a bit. So now it's time to jump into the search process. I want to give you a few quick tips. First up, we have filtering. The library search has a few useful filters that I want to call out here. First, full text online will bring you to our online resources that you can access instantly. Otherwise, you might get results for books that are at a different campus than yours, books that we can't currently access, or possibly citations for articles that you have to request. Requesting articles is definitely something that you can do using interlibrary loan. However, it can sometimes take 1 to 3 business days for that article to come in. So if you're like me and you don't start working on things until 48 hours before they're due, this isn't going to be immediately helpful. Secondly, I want to point out the scholarly and peer review filter. Since you'll want scholarly and peer-reviewed sources for your data narrative, since it requires vetted academic sources, this is a really useful button to click to filter out newspaper or magazine articles. And then finally, you can search by content type, which is useful if you want to limit your search to books or articles. So again, if you're like me, you might be like, I have exactly 42 hours to write this, and I'm absolutely uninterested in reading anything longer than 28 pages, then choosing journal article might be more useful. But if you're looking for something with a little more breadth and depth, then you could take a look at some books as well. If you're using Google, there's also some limited filter options. You can filter by date by clicking on Tools. This is particularly helpful if you want to find more recent resources. Usually for your data narrative, you'll want to find resources from the last 5 years or so, although you can use older ones if they're very important texts in the field of education. As you're searching, you'll need to keep an open mind and be flexible. You can switch between Google, the Relay library, and other sources as needed. You might not find the perfect source on the first try. Also, be aware that previous research may contradict your hypothesis or findings, and various research studies may even contradict one another. Remember, scholarship is a conversation where not everyone always agrees. As you search, be willing to expand your search if needed. For example, instead of looking for just resources on 7th graders, Maybe you'll look at middle school more generally. Or if you're looking for resources on gender and science classes, but you found this really great article on gender and mathematics, you can see if there's anything in that second article that might still be applicable to your research. In the same vein, try using synonyms if needed. So, for example, you could use grit or you could use perseverance. And finally, if you get stuck, don't hesitate to ask a librarian for help. There are librarians available 24/7 through Relay's chat system, and you can access that at the bottom of the library search page. So, what does being flexible in your search look like in practice? Let me show you an example. Here, I'm looking to find how the reading scores of my female students compare to the scores of their male peers. I want to see if other people have also done research on differences between gender and reading. So I decided to start looking in the library since I'm doing scholarly research. And I put in the search string that you see on the screen: kindergarten, reading, males, females. If you can see my results below, that search wasn't unhelpful, but the top results weren't necessarily directly related to my research question. So now I'm like, well, beans. And so I decided to check out Google instead because Google would never betray me like that. So I entered the same search string in Google, but I also added growth because maybe looking at reading growth more specifically will help me to find differences between genders. And sure enough, the top result that I get from Google looks pretty promising. However, since this isn't a peer-reviewed source, and I did find it in Google rather than the library, I'm going to have to evaluate it pretty carefully to make sure it's trustworthy. And I'll take you through how I did that in just a second. Here are some other search terms that I might try during my search. You can see here that I'm mostly just brainstorming different synonyms. I can also look at relevant search results and see the terms used in those articles, and then use that for my search. This is particularly helpful when you find an article on the Relay library, as most of our databases, such as EBSCO, ProQuest, and JSTOR, will include a list of key words in the article description. Finally, remember how I said scholarship is a conversation? It's useful to see who people are responding to when they join in that conversation, and you can do that by looking at the references they cite. The article on the screen here is from Psychology Today, and that's not really an academic source that I want to cite in my data narrative. It falls somewhere between a popular and a practitioner source, depending on the article. However, if I scroll to the very bottom of the page, I can see a bunch of references that the author used, and these are mostly scholarly research sources. I can look these articles up and see if they'd be useful in my research. This is one of my favorite research hacks, especially when I've found an article that's really similar to what I want, but just not quite what I'm looking for. Sometimes if you check the bibliography at the back, there may be a reference to an article that is exactly what you're looking for. So when we were talking about search terms earlier, and we found a helpful resource on Google, I said I was going to talk a little bit about evaluating sources that you find online. Once you find a resource, you have to evaluate it. I like using the 5 W's that you see on the screen to evaluate my source. First, you want to look at who the author of the source is, and are they experts in the field? You want to look at what the purpose of the information source is. So if they're trying to sell or promote something, I'm going to be particularly wary. You want to look at when the source originated. As I mentioned earlier, for the data narrative, I'm likely going to look at sources from the last 5 years, although if a source is one of the most important texts in the field, I might be able to use it even if it's a little bit older. You want to look at where you can verify the information. If there's only one research study on a given strategy, that might not be quite enough evidence yet to say whether that strategy is validated by research. And then lastly, why should I use this source instead of another one? Is it a frequently cited or referenced article? Is it important in the field? Has the source been peer reviewed? Let's take a look back at that Brookings article as an example. Remember, I found it on Google, so I want to be very careful about making sure it's a good source before I use it. So first, we want to look at who is the author of the source. I did a quick Google of the Brookings Institution, and I found on 2 different sites that it's a nonprofit research group and that it's nonpartisan. If I were uncertain about the source, I might do a little bit more digging to see if I could find more information. For example, I could see if it has any particularly influential donors, or whether it has information on its website about core values or policies. But at a glance, this seems like a solid resource. Second, what's the purpose? The website says that the report is an annual research project. It doesn't seem to have any particular agenda other than to do research into education and then report it, so I don't see any clear biases that I need to be wary of. The article itself is recent enough, and the statistics that it uses are publicly available, and I can check up on the references at the bottom. If I wanted to find something a little more recent, I could also do a search for this article on Google Scholar to see if there are any more recent articles that have cited this report. In summary, it's not an academic or peer-reviewed article, but it is a research-based report from a reputable group, so it seems like I can trust the information it provides. Because of that, and because it's relevant to my research question, it's likely a good source to use. However, I should keep in mind that it doesn't talk about differences that stem from race or socioeconomic status, and it doesn't talk about kindergarten age students specifically, so I'll likely want to find other articles that address those things to supplement this one. So once you've gathered and evaluated your sources, you want to be able to integrate them into your data narrative. There's a few ways of going about this. First, you want to quote or paraphrase the research. You don't have to include huge blocks of text from the original report, but you want to include relevant bits of information that back up your claim. You also want to provide commentary about how the research or theory is connected to your research question or next steps. You never want to include a quote just by itself. Every time you cite something, you should also be providing context for the information you're providing. And if you can't explain how the quote or article is connected to your research question or next steps, you should maybe reconsider including it. And then lastly, you always want to include an APA citation. You always want to make sure that you make note of where your information is coming from. Let's take a moment here to go back to the strong example from before. I'll give you a moment to pause and read through this example again. As you can see, this student used the Brookings Institute article and also added a couple of other articles to tell a fuller story. You can also note the numbers there indicating footnotes with full citations. Here's another example from Next Steps. If you notice here, there are in-text citations. However, it's not clear what they're actually quoting. For the first one, Harris 2016, are they trying to say that the article cited talks about how to plot graphs? How to encourage students to collect their own data? Is it an article about hands-on learning? It's really unclear how the citation fits into the context of this paragraph. Similarly, where they quote Gay 2010, it's not clear what it is from the original source that they're trying to reference. When you compare it to the first example that we saw, it's much clearer what the original text said and how it relates to the author's research question. As you partake in the conversation, you need to let others be able to follow the conversation by providing references to the articles that you're responding to. At Relay, we use APA Citations. You can find an APA citation guide in Lib 101. You can note that APA generally recommends in-text citations, but many students do prefer to use footnotes. As long as your professor agrees with that, that's fine. The most important thing is that you're consistent in your style and that you provide enough information for someone else to find your source. For most articles, that means including the author's name, the name of the article, the title of the journal that it's from, the journal volume and issue number, and the year it was published. Ultimately, the best way to get comfortable with citations is to practice. We've included some links in the description to some online games and tutorials that will let you practice creating and formatting APA citations for books, articles, websites, and other resources. And that's about it for this webinar. If you have any questions about anything covered in the webinar, or if you'd like to talk with a librarian about your research, feel free to email us at library@relay.edu or use our 24/7 chat service. You can also find more resources on our LibGuides, particularly our Lib 101 and Intro to Research guides. Thanks for watching.